Hello everyone, welcome to this our week 7 lecture. This is next to the last week of the term, and I hope you've had an opportunity to learn a lot more about films and gain a new appreciation for the art form. That being said, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the ideology of cinema. I'm going to quote from your textbook, Louis Giannetti's Understanding Movies. He had one of the best definitions for ideology I've seen so far in terms of filmmaking, and I'm going to share that with you now. He says that ideology is a body of ideas reflecting the social needs and aspirations of a group, class, or culture. This is so true. What happens with film? I believe it does this more than in any other medium. It forces people to really examine what's happening in their world through film. In fact, I kind of feel like films are like little time capsules. We learn so much about what is going on in the hearts and minds of people through a film. If you notice, if you look at some of the films from the 40s, a lot of those films were, I don't want to say commissioned by the American government, but a lot of the war movies contained little messages that were telling people, hey, they had to fight for their democracy, for their freedom, for the American way of life. And what happened is that it stirred up something in the psyche of Americans where they went to the front lines thinking that they had to defend their country and their lives. And some of those films were instrumental in inspiring people to do heroic things just because they had seen their favorite action hero do it. Films like 1942's Casablanca and also Flying Tigers, among others, they showed people how to think and feel about the war efforts. These films were so popular that even when the war ended, Hollywood continued to make them. In fact, there's a documentary whose name escapes me. If I remember it, I'll definitely make sure to mention it to you. But it talked about how the American government was a little bit involved in propaganda. And what they were doing is using the cinema, the movies, to get people excited about the war and thinking that they had no other choice but to fight what was essentially evil incarnate in what was happening all around the world at that particular time with World War II. So, if it weren't for those films, we wouldn't have an opportunity to see what people were thinking and feeling, and also get a good understanding of how films can influence people. We talked before about D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, and how it had such an impact on audiences that all of America was changed because of this, because it influenced what is now the Ku Klux Klan, and it also spawned maybe some other hate groups as well. So it had a powerful impact. And films, although they entertain us, a lot of times they give us messages as well. And they can be both positive and they can be negative. One of the things that often amazes me when you think about films is that there is scarcely a film, a piece of literature that doesn't have some kind of message in it. And these messages influence us. And by the same token, there are very few books or movies or whatever where you don't learn something as well. So let's talk a little bit about the different versions of ideology. There's a lot to talk about, but I'm only going to touch on the surface in this particular lecture. Of course, if you're reading your textbook, you're going to learn a lot more than you ever expected as far as how you are to approach this particular subject. And I think you'll think differently when you go to the movies, if you haven't already started thinking differently. One of the things we're going to talk about is ideological explicitness. Yes, say that 3 times fast. Basically, you have a number of different types of this idea. You have something called neutral, and basically in the neutral version of this, you have characters that are a little silly. Sometimes it's as what is known as escapist fare, and it's light entertainment. You're not doing a lot of heavy thinking on any of these kinds of films. Your book talked about Bringing Up Baby, but I have to say Raising Arizona, another Coen Brothers movie, and it was I was debating on whether or not to include Raising Arizona in a selection of films that I use, but I decided to go with Fargo instead of Raising Arizona, but I might change my mind. It's one of my favorite movies from the Coen Brothers, and it's kind of light. The characters aren't, they have some right and wrong characters, but they're not really dark. Coen Brothers can usually go pretty dark with their work. And essentially, I think most of Hollywood blockbusters are kind of neutral in their ideology. I think you have a lot of escapist fare. And to a certain extent, I think that's why the last Batman versus Superman didn't do as well at the theater, because it had some very heavy themes. And a friend of mine says he thinks it made people think too much. I thought that was hilarious. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but the way in which it was presented, a lot of times people see superhero movies and they figure good versus evil. They don't think about how the evil can actually touch them. But if you think about the early Superman stories, Superman fought the Nazis in some of the comic books. Superman also fought the Klan. Superman in some of the radio serials. So I didn't have a problem with that movie, but I think a lot of people weren't expecting that kind of dark, heavy fare, especially at this period in time. Then you also have your implicit ideology films. And you have a protagonist and an antagonist, and they represent different values, but it's not focused on that much. Again, is not as dark. However, you do have a degree of darkness in it. Disney films. That's the first thing that pops into your head. A lot of the Disney films, you have a bad guy, yeah, but it's not so bad, and you can kind of get rid of them. Although, I will say that some of the recent Disney movies have really stepped up their game, where you're actually focusing on who these characters are and what they're representing. It's not like, oh, we have good guys and we have bad guys, but we're not really going to focus on the deep psychological issues that cause these people to be so bad. You know, think about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The witch was vain, but we didn't look into the psychological reasoning why she was that vain and why she figured that anybody in the kingdom was prettier than her, had to be gotten rid of. If we really looked into that, I think that mirror is a little bit too dark, and it might reflect something we don't want to see. So anyway, I'm going to move away from that. Let's talk about explicit ideology. Or these movies are movies that have a message. I argue that all movies have a message, right? But you might have definitely heavier themes. Think about Mississippi Burning or American Violet, Mother Night, Les Miserables, all of these, Apt Pupil, Apt Pupil, if you've never heard of it, APTPUPIL, so it's Apt and Pupil. It is a movie that was inspired by a Stephen King short story where these children, these teenagers, they do some research on their neighbor, and they discover that he was a Nazi. And so basically, you're exploring themes of good versus evil, and also what makes someone evil. So it's a lot of really dark themes that are going on in that piece, and I would advise you to pick it up. It's a really good watch. All right, people, thank you so much. That's going to do it for this particular lecture. I want to thank you for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.